Well, hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. This is History's Calling. Where will it take you? And today we are honored to have one of our own BYU professors with us today, Leslie Hadfield. Leslie, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you, everybody, for your patience with our webinar. We're so excited about what we're going to talk about today. So welcome. Dr. Hadfield, I was wondering, maybe you could start a little bit about, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about who you are, your undergraduate experience, your graduate experience, and explain to the students why you're here today.
Okay, great. And just let me know if you need me to change any of my settings here. I am, Dr. Leslie Hadfield, born and bred in Logan, Utah, Cache Valley. And because of that, I ended up going to Utah State University. I'm from a family of Aggies. My parents graduated from Utah State, and then all of my siblings did. So I enjoyed my time there very much. I started off as a business major, and then I switched to history. And I think we'll talk more about that later. So I ended up, while I was a student at Utah State, and after I'd switched to history, I did a study abroad program to South Africa through BYU. BYU was very gracious to let me join the program. And that was in the fall of 2000. I went to South Africa for the entire semester. I stayed with a local family there, a Xhosa family, who they're still my family today. And I came home, I had a wonderful experience. And I thought that I was going to just continue doing what I had planned, which was to study American political history and then go work for the government somehow. And I wondered, what do I do with this profound experience I just had? And I ended up, long story short, I ended up deciding to do a master's in African history. And then I ended up doing a PhD in African history. And I went to Ohio University for my master's, and I then went to Michigan State for my PhD. I continued to study the Xhosa language and Swahili as well. I do my research in South Africa, where Xhosa is spoken. I've published 2 books. The Liberation and Development is my first book, about the Black consciousness movement in the 1970s. My second book is about nurses who worked in rural clinics in South Africa in about the same time period. And now I'm working on a book about porters and guides who work on Kilimanjaro. So I've been involved in a study abroad program in Tanzania. And I got hired at BYU as soon as I graduated, which was a wonderful blessing to have a job on graduation. I graduated 3 times. That was the only time that happened, but it was the most important time. So I was happy for that. So I've been here at BYU since 2010.
Thank you so much. And what incredible work that you're doing. Did you ever think that this would be your path? Like when you first started, you talked about your trajectory a little bit, where you started and then where you ended. What were some really pivotal things that drew you to history?
Great question. I did not, when I started my freshman year at Utah State, I did not think I was going to become a professor. I had always been interested in Africa and learning about other cultures ever since I was younger. And so that's one reason why my sister, when she heard about this program to South Africa, she suggested it. And I had taken a class on race and communication in the new South Africa and the United States, which was an honors course at Utah State, which introduced me to the program as well. So those were some things that drew me to South Africa. But also, when I started my degree at Utah State, I thought I was going to do something very practical. I come from a working class family. I needed to get a job when I was finished with school, even though education was very important. And so I thought I'll go be in business. A lot of my family is in business. And so that was my plan. I had all these dreams, and then I thought it was going to be the government. But when I started looking at the classes, I took that first intro to business class. And no offense to business or people who choose business, that just turned out it was not for me. And that first intro to business class, I asked myself, can I do 4 years of this? And I thought, I went to look at, I thought maybe I could do a minor in history. I really enjoyed history in high school. And I looked at all of the classes that were offered through history, and all of them but one looked exciting to me. And I thought, I think I'm going to do this. And then by the end of my first year, I dropped business altogether, and history was my major, and political science was my minor. And I think it goes along with those things that I loved learning about other cultures and people in other times and places are from a different culture, even if they are from Utah, but 100 years ago, it's different. And so it's fascinating to me and to learn how we got to where we are today. Now, I was pretty confident that I could make the history degree work for me in whatever profession I chose, and I still am confident about that. There was an infographic that I looked at that had what you can do with a history degree. And so I saw all these different opportunities. But I think doing internships and the study abroad programs were really important to me, to figuring out what exactly that was that I wanted to do.
And how valuable that was, because I know we have a lot of students that are interested in peoples and cultures, and they will do international studies programs, and they'll do maybe even policy programs. And it sounds to me like you were able to marry a lot of your different interests together by this degree. Can you tell us a little bit about, it sounds to me like the things that you've studied are really political in nature. And so maybe help us understand how you were able to take the things that you were learning with your extracurricular courses and mesh those worlds together, like what that process was and what that looked like.
Thank you. Yes. So I, always was interested in talking about politics, maybe working for the government, like I said, maybe not being a politician myself, but so that became a minor of mine. One of my, just as a side note, one of my favorite classes I took, again, was through the honors program, and it was Power and Politics in Shakespeare's Historical Plays. So it sounded like a fun class, but also I learned some really valuable things in that class. And so that was one. I was involved in student government a little bit at Utah State, but going to travel to do a study abroad program, it also, I'll bring those back together in a moment, but that allowed me to explore the world and understand myself in a way that I would not have otherwise, and to explore these issues of race in our society. That was also always had been an interest of mine. Even when I was in high school, 8th grade, I remember giving a speech on racial integration in my class. It was something that always was interesting to me. And so to follow that in the United States history and then South African history. And then I ended up, the movement that I studied for my PhD was the Black consciousness movement. So combining politics, it was a political movement that had to do with race in South Africa, working for civil rights, and how they did that through community development programs. And that's where the title of my book comes from, Liberation and Development. And so that brought in that other aspect that I was interested in, especially through the study abroad program. And so it combined all of those. And now the other thing is that I had wanted to get out there and have a job after my master's, but once I had that expertise through my PhD, then I could start engaging in discussions and teaching about development, and all of that got wrapped up into what I ended up doing for my dissertation in that first book.
That's amazing. With your current expertise and with the research that you're doing now, tell us a little bit about how that works as a professor, along with the teaching that you do with our students. What other opportunities exist for you to continue that movement? And then also maybe even talk about, do you partner with outside entities for development purposes? Do you work with nonprofits? I know that you've had professional development experiences outside of your immediate research. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so being at a university, one of my favorite things about it is that we are a center of knowledge production. and we get to be on the cutting edge of that knowledge. I love learning the latest that people put out. And that also means that I've had the opportunity to take that to the community. So there are some times when I've been on the BYU radio, when I've been involved in the Provo Police Department a few years ago, asked a few of us to come and talk to the community with their community discussions about race. And so I could add on that expertise. In church, I've been involved in the Swahili speaking branch in Salt Lake, which is made up of a lot of people who came to the United States from originated in Central Africa, but came as refugees to the United States. And so looking at the truth and the skills that I gained in my education in university to help in that way, but also, like you say, in the community, I'm involved. I've been involved in a couple of nonprofit organizations. One is here local in Utah County, the Ngoma ya Africa Cultural Center. And that was founded by Yvonne Nsabimana Baraketse, who is from Rwanda originally, but again she went to Europe as her family fled Rwanda in 1994. And then she ended up here in Utah and founded this group to help Africans who came for education or for other reasons to have a community and to educate Utahns. And so I've been involved in that for the past almost 6 years now. And we put on an African Heritage Festival at the University Place in Orem last year. We're going to do that again. And so the connections, the networks I have, the experience I've had through my research and other opportunities, and then again, learning from people from the past on these things have helped me be involved in those different organizations.
That's amazing. I hope those of you who are tuning in are hearing this vibrant world that has opened up as a result of Dr. Hadfield's work and research. I mean, it goes beyond being in the classroom, which, by the way, is still a very provocative thing, right? Like, we still have a lot of students that thrive in that kind of environment, but how many amazing opportunities as a result of your research. I think that's really valuable.
Yes, and I'll just say this, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but what I can teach in the classroom is very much also informed by what I learned through my own research and through my involvement outside of the classroom, even here at BYU. And that is really valuable to me to give my students the best education.
That's great. Thank you. So I want to kind of take a step into the logistics, right? If you told us a little bit about your journey and the decisions that you needed to make along the way to kind of gear you up for all these different pieces of becoming a professor, but could you share maybe some things that helped you in your undergrad experience inform your next steps in terms of skill sets or research? It's very different the way that professorship turns up as a career option. It looks differently than maybe advice that we would give business students. So can we talk a little bit about what that looked like to choose your master's degree, to continue with your PhD? Your experience is aided in that, but maybe what skill sets or what conversations or what mentorship did you have?
Yes, I will. I didn't start off thinking I'm going to go be a professor, but looking back, I know that I had opportunities and skills that made it so that I was a good candidate for graduate school. And again, the networks, the connections that you have. So when I was an undergrad, I thought, okay, I want to go to graduate school. I had a few professors at Utah State who were pretty influential in helping me on that path. One was he was a professor of French history. I had a class with him, had great experience with him and a couple of other students. And he called me into his office and said, I can see you have skills here. I would love to see you continue. And if you finish up early with your bachelor's, I can do a master's with you, and then we can get you into a PhD program. And I'd thought about doing a master's, but I hadn't been that serious about it at that point. And so then that really got the wheels turning. And that's about the same time that I decided to do the study abroad program. And when I took that to him, he said, that's great. It would, because it was going to end up increasing my time to graduation. But he said that will only make you a better person and give you better experiences. So he was a good mentor in that sense that and that was Dr. Len Rosenband. He's now retired from Utah State, but he's had a big impact on a number of us here at BYU. He really saw my potential and wanted me to achieve what I wanted to achieve. He wasn't going to push his own agenda on me, which I really appreciated. And he did a directed readings with me over the summer, one summer, to help me get into these bigger ideas that you don't necessarily get into in your undergraduate classes. So that was one person. The other, I had a number of professors who just were very great, but one in particular, he taught African history at Utah State. And so he was one who I of course took a couple of classes from, anything that I could from him, but also I asked him for advice on how to go to grad school. So this was Chris Conti at the Utah State University. And I ended up, I mean, it just turned out to be the best thing for me, but I ended up following exactly in his footsteps. He did a master's at Ohio University and his PhD at Michigan State. So that ended up being what I did. And then I came back to Utah. So it's pretty fun. But he let me know, okay, if you want to do a PhD in African history, if you want to follow that, he suggested that I start with a master's program and maybe even do a master's in an area studies, African studies. I ended up doing history. I applied for a master's in public administration as well. And I was consulting with different professors and different students. And I decided not to go that route, even though partly because I felt I needed more skills that I could draw on for the Masters of Public Administration. In that I could see the wisdom that, okay, that is an add-on to other things that you already bring to the table. And so I thought, okay, I need more language skills and I need some more education in African studies. And I did history because that worked out. I went to Ohio University. I also was offered a really good fellowship there. And again, it's because of people telling me about these programs. I contacted professors who I thought I would work with ahead of time so I could learn about the program. I didn't ever go to these places in person, but I would suggest that's a good thing to do. I did contact I think I contacted a couple of students and also people in the church in those places so I could get a feel for what it would be like to live there, go there as a student. And then when I was finishing my master's degree, again, I didn't know what I was going to do. I was burned out with school. I didn't want to continue reading my guts out and not all day, right? I wanted to go to work at 8 and come home at 5. I wanted that normal life that other people had in my life. But then I realized through some experiences that this is what I needed to do what I wanted to continue to do with my life. And so I had to put that time in, and it turned out that it worked out very well for me to go to Michigan State. It was the best place for me to go for a number of reasons, looking at the people, again, who I was going to work with, my advisor, the resources the university offered in African history. It's now one of the top programs in the United States for African history. And the language training that they offered, the library, I mean, a number of things, plus there was a pretty good church community there for students going to Michigan State. I was just talking for a while. I'm sure I missed something. Do you have other follow-up questions, or did I go?
No, yes, thank you so much for covering all of that. What I'm hearing is that your network helped expand your view of what was possible. And so I know I meet with a lot of students, and Allison, our internship coordinator, and Arnie meet with a lot of students who are a little bit more shy. It sounds like you were approached about some of these opportunities, and then that kind of opened this floodgate to others. What advice would you have for our students who are a little bit more shy when it comes to networking starting with a professor? I think I do have a lot of students that come and say, I don't know how to start these conversations with these professors. What would you suggest for them?
Thank you for that. And that reminded me of another thing I was going to bring up, which I'll bring up when I finish answering this question. So I was lucky to have two older sisters ahead of me at Utah State, and my oldest sister said to me, go to professors' offices at least once a semester. I don't know, maybe she didn't give that kind of prescription, but that's the message I got. She said, they want to talk to you and they want to help you. And so you will understand better how to do well in their class. And so I did that. And there was even one class, I was so excited to take it, the history of the civil rights movement in the United States. I told myself, I'm going to ask a question every class. I'm naturally a shy person. And it got to the point where the professor would say, okay, are there any questions? And then he once said, Leslie, do you have a question? Because I was going to make a comment, that was my goal one time in class, and then also to go talk to the professors. So that challenged myself to be more engaged. And that I think is important to break that barrier. I have to remind myself now when students come to my office that it was kind of scary to knock on the door outside the office. Are they working? Are they even there? And you're nervous about going in, but professors, I can tell you, really want to see you. So the history department does, we do have some informal mentoring assignments. So if you get an email from somebody, a professor saying, hey, I'd like to talk to you, go to their office. They would be happy to talk to you. We have office hours for a reason. I also think doing internships and study abroad programs is really key for that as well. So I probably would not have, doing that study abroad program in South Africa expanded my world in so many ways and also gave me more people skills. And then it gave me that also legitimacy, so that I think when I went to talk to Professor Conte or when I wanted to take his other class, I could say I have some experience in this country and on the continent. And that boosted my confidence. Also, I ended up doing an internship after I graduated, and I went to the family history library at the church headquarters in Salt Lake. I thought that was something that I wanted to do. I loved doing the research and I loved helping people at the desk, but I found I did not like working in a library. I wanted to be the one discovering what was in the past and bringing it forth to people. And that was such a valuable experience. That was another thing that gave me a very good thing on my resume that showed graduate programs that I didn't just have a degree from the classroom. I knew how to work with records and documents and think through problems and find people in the past, as well as have this experience in South Africa. So I wish I would have done that earlier in my undergraduate experience, so that I could say, okay, actually, I don't want to do that, and now I'm going to go this direction. It was so valuable in learning what direction to take. And then it gave me as well again, something on my resume to help me get accepted into these programs, but another network of people that I actually didn't end up using the family history network, but I could network with other people later in life because I knew that library. And I could tell other professors or researchers, yes, this is what you're going to find. This is how you search the database. So those things are also very valuable.
Absolutely. In fact, students, if you haven't had a chance, we interviewed Dean Rerberger from Michigan State, who can talk about the marriage of technology and history and how valuable that skill set is, particularly as you're doing and facilitating your own research, understanding how records are kept, understanding how to navigate archives, libraries, data collections, records. It's a huge, huge part. So just kind of a plug for Dean Rerberger's interview. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm curious to know, you've talked a lot about your study abroad experience in Africa, and I know that it's helped inform your research. Can you maybe share a little bit about now as a professor in your professional development and these things that you're doing, how is experiential learning? How has it followed you through time? And maybe just your testimony of experiential learning when it comes to doing the next thing. I know you've talked about it, but maybe talk about it in the lens of right now, how you're still facilitating those experiences. I mean, it sounds like you're involved in so many things, but maybe talk a little bit about the faith of that, I guess.
Okay, yes. So I think sometimes in history we don't realize how much experiential learning we do. Because anytime you're doing a research project and you're getting involved in those primary sources, you're practicing history. That's the practical application or practical work of history. It's not just reading books that other historians have written. It's going in and creating your own interpretation, which is so exciting. So I love that part of assignments in class. And also taking students on study abroad programs. So going to Tanzania, I was brought in because of my language skills and because I'd been to Tanzania, but my research also came out of just meeting people and understanding, seeing what other people were doing their research on. And going to climb Mount Kilimanjaro was a very important part of understanding this research that I ended up doing, because I could see, I actually have tried carrying a pack that some of the porters, but for a few steps, I wish I could try for the whole time. I don't know if they would let me, but I understand what it's like to be on the mountain, and I've seen it firsthand. And so that gives me the real world knowledge to put into writing history. So as a scholar, that experiential learning is still key. And in fact, I come from a line of scholars, or I say a line, kind of my ancestral lineage of scholars who were taught to, you go and you experience it, because you can't understand people from the past, or you can't understand something if you haven't gotten your hands dirty doing certain things. And so also as a professor, as I'm training students, I love giving them opportunities. So one project that's been really great for me, I don't have time to do it myself, but a student approached me and said, I'd like to do research with you. Do you have anything I could work on? And she's from Zimbabwe. And I said, I would love to develop a Pioneers in Africa pamphlet that could be some materials for a youth conference. And so I worked her through this. She was doing the work, learning things. And so doing that on her resume is she's doing the work of a historian. And we're accomplishing this really important project, and I can help her with that. So anytime, I've had students reach out and I haven't had work for them to do, but it's still, I think, fine for students to reach out and say, I love the work you're doing. Is there anything that I can do with you? Also, yeah, study abroad internships. I would love to, I've had help students get some internships, and love to create those networks for students to get those experiences.
Great, thank you. And I know you've talked about it several times during this interview, but it's one of those things that we really wanted to drive home. So thank you for taking the time to explain that again in a way that I think helps students understand the value of experiences. I have a lot of students that ask me or tell me that they've received advice maybe not to become a history professor.
Yeah.
And I know that there are a lot of cautions that are given from various faculty on campus about wanting to pursue this kind of career. Could you tell us, maybe give some advice to our students as they approach the question of whether or not they want to become a professor? Any cautions or any recommendations that they need to be aware of?
Yeah, so I went into history, like I said, thinking I'm going to do something else. I'm not going to be a professor, until I decided to do my PhD. And part of it is because, again, I didn't kind of think that was for me for a little while. And then it turned out to be the best job for me personally. So I think it's partly a personal journey that everybody has to go through. Another thing that I was cautioned by some of my professors that it's a stressful profession. You have to, once you finish your dissertation, you get your PhD, you have to get a job. That's the next step that one of my professors said. And then once you get that job, you got to get tenure. And so it can be a long, drawn out time before you are secure economically or in your employment. At the same time, I was thinking the other day how I feel I'm set up. I've achieved certain things in my job and in my profession that now I feel like unless there was some big catastrophe, I'm going to be secure. So I appreciate that. But the academic job market is not good. It's competitive. Because if you think of all the students who are getting PhDs and then all the positions that are there and who's retiring, who's changing. So you just have to be aware that it might be that you would love to be a professor, but it might end up that you have to choose another option. And I have seen fellow students and colleagues have to do that just because of the numbers. So in considering that, like I said, I didn't go into my graduate studies so worried about that, and I probably should have been a little bit, and maybe, but it worked out for me. I wasn't worried about, can I support a family with this? I should have thought of that probably a little bit more. But I was following a passion and following also what I was good at. So I've said this in another interview I did with Lindsay, that I came up with this formula for myself that I was going to use my talents and my opportunities to make the world a better place. So what was going to be that combination? That how could what talents and skills did I have, and what opportunities did I have, and then how can I bring those together? And so I ended up discovering that, I had these skills in history and academia, and I had opportunities, and it's turned out to put me in that place. I will say that you should, when you're considering graduate school, I would discourage people from going to a program where you would have to pay out of pocket or go into debt, because I think with the risk of not getting a job at the end, or maybe you have a goal that I'm going to go into publishing. And so that that's going to maybe put you in a different path than academia. That could it could turn out that you graduate with some debt and it puts you in a bad position. One of my friends who was doing his research at the same time I was in South Africa, he said, when we were finishing up our PhDs, he was at the University of Florida. He had not had as much teaching experience as he could have, and I think that's one thing that set him back on the job market. But he said, if I would have known I wouldn't have a job at the end, I still would have done this. And I think that's the attitude you have to have if you're going to do this. You're going to do a PhD, that you shouldn't do it to make money. If that's your primary goal, then you should be in a different profession anyway, because you're going to have, but it might change what you do too much. And if you're chasing a job, then you might end up being unhappy. Or another thing is but you do need to think strategically, and so you should look at where are people getting jobs. So in a way, I was lucky. I wanted to do African history, and there was a better job market for people doing African history because there are much fewer people who are doing African history or Middle Eastern history or have these language skills that I had. So that made me stand out. And the fact that I went to Michigan State as well, so a top program in African history, also was another stamp of approval or of excellence on my application. And I know that played a role in me getting a job at BYU, because people knew Michigan State was a good place to do African history. So there are those things that you need to take into account. And your advisor, again, those networks being important, having a good advisor who has networks who can get you into those conferences, who can help you know what archives, for your own research, but also who might have some friends at other places, and you can say, okay, I know somebody from our department who had a very strong letter of recommendation from his advisor, who I knew did not give out recommendations lightly. And so that also helped him get a job here. So all of those things, I think, being strategic, but also following your own personal path and knowing if that's for you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that advice. And I know that there's probably, we could teach a class, right, on what this looks like in terms of going from your undergraduate to your master's to your PhD. But I think that I loved what you said about, I would have done it anyway, right? Like in spite of maybe some debt, in spite of the fact that it was so long, I would have done it anyway. And I think that goes back to the drive to gain that knowledge and then to also share that knowledge with others. So thank you. Students, at this time, we actually wanted to open it up for questions. Please go ahead and submit any questions that you have into the Q&A on the Zoom. I have one extra question for Leslie as those come in, and then turn the time to Arnie to ask any questions that you might have. The question I had in follow-up to what you just said, Leslie, is about finances. So how do our students start looking into being paid, I guess, or not paying as much as they go into a master's and PhD program? You mentioned a fellowship, you've mentioned maybe doing research assistance work. Maybe help us understand how that can be to their benefit.
Yes, that's important. And again, that's also part of the experiential learning in a way. It's paid labor and professors benefit from that labor, but it also gives you experience in teaching and in research. So when I did my master's at Ohio University, I got offered two fellowships. One was a teaching assistantship for the department. So that was, a lot of places do this because they need graduate students to help them with their teaching load. And that was going to cover my tuition and then give me a stipend, or at least the wages for working. And then I was offered a fellowship through the Contemporary History Institute. So sometimes you might have centers of study or other programs at universities that offer students fellowships. So that ended up meaning that I didn't have to work. I got this fellowship to, I think it was, oh, actually, you know what? Now I'm a little bit wrong on that. I was offered that, and I wasn't going to have to teach, but then I got another fellowship, which I ended up taking, and that's the Foreign Language and Area Studies Fellowship. I forgot that I had that in my master's and part of my PhD. So the Foreign Language and Area Studies Fellowship is a federal grant that, again, paid for my tuition, but then gave me a stipend. And that was they said, if you study a language, an African language and African history, then the United States government saw that having people who have expertise in other areas of the world helps us as a nation. And I think they also hope that people will go work for the government, or in academia, right? So they see this as an investment. And so I had that fellowship for my master's degree, and then for at least 2 years of my PhD degree. And that was so beneficial because I didn't have to work as a TA. But then I also had some other jobs during the summer where I was a research assistant for my professor. I transcribed interviews. I built some bibliographies for him. And that's another way that students can pay their way, where it could be a department offers to cover your tuition and then pays you for that work. So you might still have to do a little bit of work to pay for your living expenses, but those tuition and fees are paid for. That's a big thing, especially I was out of state. And so that was really important. And then I was a teaching assistant. I had a teaching fellowship for the last year and a half of my PhD, and that gave me, I taught my own course actually, which was really valuable. And I TA'd for 3 other courses, and some of those were really helpful for future teaching as well as my own research. So those are other things to consider and ask about when you're doing your applications.
That's fantastic. And then the people that you talked to figure that out, did you talk to the department? Did you talk to the admissions office? Did you talk to advisors?
Yeah,
all
great
of the
question.
above?
Yeah, so I talked to the department. I looked on their website. I think my advice is to reach out to a professor who you would work with, because you're going to have an advisor when you go to graduate school, and it's really important that that person is good to work with and also is going to help you out. And so they said, okay, you should apply for this, and there's this funding in this aspect. And the African Studies centers at Ohio University and Michigan State University. That was another reason why I chose those schools, because they had those resources, and I got plugged in there, which was also really important. So asking those sorts of questions, what other resources are there on campus that could put me through this program?
Fantastic, thank you. Arnie, do we have any questions to go through, or do you and Allison have any follow-up questions or thoughts?
Well, we don't have any official Q&A questions. Following along here, Leslie, you just, every question that I've had, you've answered almost in the very next paragraph, which has been very educational for me. And maybe that's the same thing with our students. I'd like to ask you one question, and this is kind of on a personal level, and I think that I already know the answer. But do you love your job?
I love my job. Thank you for asking me that question. And let me tell you why I love my job. And I didn't know that being a professor was my dream job until I became a professor. So it's kind of, I think God knew that and was helping me get there. I had to make decisions and I had to do work along the way, and it wasn't easy. I love it because I love doing research. That's probably my favorite part of the job. If I enjoy teaching as well. It's very much, up there with the research. But I love doing that research. I love having the independence to do that research and to decide what I focus on and to decide how I'm going to do it. I mean, I feel like I've been given so much freedom in that sense to soar and to travel and answer these questions I have. It's been absolutely wonderful that way. And of course, that's another part. I love traveling. I love going to conferences around the country. I love doing my research in different countries. I love doing study abroad. But I love the stability that a university brings. So I don't have to worry about fundraising for my own. I have to get funding for some of my work, but I don't have to fundraise and this also comes with being at a private university. I don't have to worry about whether or not I'm going to sell my product and then I can continue opening my shop, right? Or something like that if you're in business. So I love that stability. And I also love, like I said, being at the forefront of knowledge production and seeing change and being with the future generations, the generations of leaders to come. And I think one of the most important things I do in my work is teaching, what I do in the classroom, what I do with mentorship and the students. And so that gives me a lot of fulfillment to help people grow and improve and reach their own dreams.
Great answer. Thank you for that. I think I could tell how much you love your job. And I think it's so important for students to realize that let's keep searching until we find that thing that really brings us joy, because when that happens, when we can find the horizon in our life where the sun comes up, everything kind of falls into place. And you're a perfect example of that, of how opportunities have come your way and you've been able to see opportunities and take advantage of them. And things don't happen by mistake. I think things happen for a reason, and it's to bring us joy.
That's true. I want to tell just one quick story about that. When I was at the Family History Library, I was in a lunchroom with some coworkers, and I was planning to go to South Africa. So this was a temporary gig, right? An internship. I was there for the summer. And then I was planning to go to South Africa for the fall as a student facilitator for the study abroad program. And somebody asked me, so are you going to continue to do research or continue on after you are finished here at the library? And somebody else answered for me and said, "Are you kidding? Do you see how her face lights up when she talks about it?" And that helped me see what I really wanted to do. And I don't think I had the confidence to make it happen at that point. But because, and I think that's why maybe I was not really letting myself see that. But that was a really eye opener for me to say, okay, yeah, you obviously, if you're showing other people just by the way that you talk about it, then this is something you ought to pursue.
I think that's fantastic. And we'll give a shameless plug to Lindsay and Allison and I that students, if you need help with finding these things, come see us. We have great resources and doors that we can open for you. So that's all of the questions that I have. So Lindsay, let's just come back to you. And Leslie, thank you so much for sharing with us today.
You're welcome.
We really, really appreciate it. We have a lot of students that are in the process of figuring out the formula that works for them. I love that example. Every time you've told me that story of what you needed to do to understand what was next for you, the process that you went through in your decision making. And so thank you again so much for everything. Thank you for what you're doing for students too, to help them figure out what is going to work for them and the decision process that works for them as they transition, during this huge part of their lives. So really, really appreciate your time today. And thank you everybody for coming.
Thank you.